So I'm going to explain the whole figure drawing process. For how I did this drawing is like a 7 or 8 minute sketch of a figure, and then I painted it digitally. But as I go, I'm going to explain what skills I used, where I used them, but more importantly, I'm going to explain roughly when I learned them, because it can be really overwhelming to think, oh my God, I need to learn like all of these different skills. They're each really quite involved, and I need to learn them all at once, right? I definitely did not learn them all at once. I learned them painstakingly one by one. I did not learn them like Neo in the Matrix, just absorbing it, downloading it to your brain. It's not going to happen. So before we even start, you'll notice as I sketch that I'm not doing much measuring. Like I'm not checking the size of the head relative to the size of everything else. The reason for that is just because I've done that so many times. I did so many drawings where I did measure things that I kind of I'm able to do it just by eyeballing it now. Every time I did the measurements, I go, okay, so this is the length of the head, and then I will compare that to, the length of the upper arm. Every time I did that, I'm kind of calibrating my eyes. I'm improving my sense of proportion. And I did so many drawings like that now I don't need to worry about it. And sometimes I do see figure drawing teachers being like, hey, don't do that measuring. Don't measure because it makes your drawing stiff and it disrupts your flow and stuff like that, right? Which is absolutely true. If I was measuring the whole time during this, I wouldn't have had much fun with it, and it would have gotten more stiff and stuff like that. But the only reason that I'm able to do it without worrying about the proportions is because I did so many measured drawings before. And then I have that, skill in place, and now I can forget about it. It's not that it just like doesn't matter at all, The other thing is you can see here I start to draw, you can see the pencil that I have. You see how it's not like a normal pencil sharpener, the end of a pencil when it's sharpened with a normal pencil sharpener looks like this. It is longer and it's a little bit tapered, like a little bit curved like this, and the bit of exposed lead is a little bit longer. That allows me to put down all kinds of different marks of different widths and strengths and stuff like that. That took me months to learn how to sharpen the pencil. I spent like 2 months learning how to sharpen the pencil and snapping pencils and stuff like that, and building up the muscle memory of being able to do it. Also exploring different pencils to see which one I liked and different papers, and I ended up with the smooth newsprint that I use now. So all of these different elements, like you can kind of fast forward it because you could just do, you could just get the smooth newsprint that I use or whatever if you want to, but different countries have different paper available. So you probably are going to have to explore things yourself and explore different ways of sharpening your pencil and stuff like that. Each little bit of this, I didn't just know magically. I had to spend ages just trying to figure it out. All right, so the grip that I'm using is the overhand grip. It took me a while to get used to that. It felt really weird at first. But also you can see that, you see the marks I have, like I got like a little ball shape in the head, and that's just based on doing the Loomis head exercises for a while. I put down that initial ball shape with a very light mark, right? I couldn't do light marks at first. I absolutely couldn't do them. And I spent a month or 2 working on drawing light to be able to do that. So what I've done wrong here is I really should have started with the rib cage, not the head. When I start with the head, I end up stiffening the pose and straightening it. So for some reason, if I start with the rib cage and then place the ball of the head, and then, the brow line and the jaw and the chin, I can push the head across far enough. But when I start with the head, let's say I get rid of the rib cage here. When I start with the head, I always somehow end up putting the rib cage more straight underneath it and stiffening the pose a little bit. And that does happen here. So let's keep going. Not too bad, but I have pushed the rib cage. I think this is what I've done. I've got the rib cage a little bit too far across here. And the pose would be more dynamic if I had it further over, sorry, to the left, like that. But this ability right here to simplify the form of the head, first I did it by practicing the Loomis head for a while, and then I just took this, I simplified that for figure drawing, because you don't need that whole process for a figure drawing. Then the ability to see the rib cage in the figure. This was a total game-changing moment for me, and it took a long time to be able to do. That process, I'm proud to say, I think we have made that learning this process of seeing these simple forms much easier. So we introduce it with our Fresh Eyes mini course. We have more tutorials on the YouTube channel about it, and it's the focus of our Figure Foundations course, which is the new course we're running now. This is such a game-changing way to start your figure drawings, and I really wish I'd learned it earlier. I think I could have, fast-forwarded my progress by like 18 months if I had learned this earlier, instead of messing around with, basically I was really confused about what to learn and when to learn it. I was learning all these little muscles and things, trying to memorize them and stuff like that. I should have been focused on these really important forms. So then the last one is just to sort of roughly place the pelvis. We can't really see much of that pants shape that I like to use there, but we can still place it, and we can still, importantly, get the overall idea that the rib cage is leaning forwards like this, while the pelvis is relatively flat. And so that's going to create a bit of a squash on the front, on the tummy side, on the abs, and a stretch on the spine side like this, because she's leaning forwards, right? Normally in a standing pose, the rib cage is leaning back, the pelvis is more leaning forwards, there's a stretch along the tummy and a little bit more of a squash on the back, like that. But in this case, because she's leaning forwards, the squash is on the front. So let me just clear all of this. So you can see there's a lot more squashing happening here, and there's a lot more stretching happening here. That squash and stretch idea is central to the gesture. And so in order to understand the squash and stretch, I first need to understand what the rib cage is doing. Then I need to understand what the pelvis is doing. And then I can see, okay, here's the squash and here's the stretch, right? And that is crucial to gesture. And I was messing around with gesture, not sure how to do it for such a long time, until I realized that this is central to the whole gesture. Okay, and that's why I've really emphasized that squash on the tummy on the front. Okay, so because I placed the head lightly, because I spent all those months learning how to just draw light lines, I've been able to put the simple form of the head in lightly, and now I can put this shape of the hair on top, like that. Now I don't do it like a bunch of strands, I'm doing it as a big shape. The skill that I'm pulling out and using here is abstract shapes. So it's really useful. So here, like there's the negative space in between here. It's a nice abstract, simple 2D shape. This is another nice abstract 2D shape. And so this is a skill, one of the most important skills I have in the toolbox, one that I work on all the time, right from the beginning of when I was learning to draw until now I'm still working on it, is simplifying the shapes and designing them better. So in the beginning, I was just trying to actually capture the abstract shapes that I could see. And now with time, I've learned more ideas about how to design shapes nicely, so I can bring out the ideas in the shapes that I really want to bring out. And so this is the shapes skill is one that I've been working on throughout. Every sketch, there's going to be shapes. Everything you draw from life is going to create a set of shapes, and you're going to be drawing those shapes. And so the ability to abstract the shapes that you're seeing and then put those down, simplify them and put them down on paper is a really big deal. So now I'm putting down the shadows. This again is about the abstract shape skill, right? So here I've got this shape right here. I've seen it as an abstract 2D shape, right? When you're starting out, you're thinking, I need to draw, I need to draw the shoulder, I need to draw the chest, I need to draw this bit, I need to draw the tummy. But once you can start to think, I need to draw this abstract 2D shape, that's very, very powerful for your drawings. It's really, really tempting to over-exaggerate ideas like these folds here, right? This is a classic thing for beginners, and people less experienced with drawing will kind of not emphasize this big overall shape, and instead really emphasize with strong marks like little folds and little details and stuff like that. And so and I used to do that, right? The ability to basically look at this figure, squint. As soon as you squint, everything that doesn't matter disappears like magic. So when I squint, these little folds and stuff, they disappear. So I know they don't matter. But when I squint, the big overall shadow shape remains. And so I know it matters, right? All the little irrelevant details, letting those go took me years. It took me years to let go of irrelevant details. I still sometimes cling on to them, right? So if you struggle with this, it's like you might just need to keep practicing it for another year, because I certainly didn't like magically just start doing it as soon as I read about it. I knew I should squint, but then I wouldn't believe in my squint. I'd be like, well, yeah, these things disappeared when I squinted, but they seem really important, right? And so just having the confidence in the squinting and the simple shapes created, right? If you don't want to squint, if you're working digitally, you can like zoom out on the reference to make it really, really small or something like that. But anyway, by the way, you can see how I've straightened this pose out a little bit, right, in the sketch. My sketch is more like this. Yeah, and it's not as curved, the rib cage is not pushed across as far as the real pose. If anything, my sketch should be more dynamic, not less dynamic. And that's because I started with the head, I think, rather than the rib cage. Okay, so when I'm tackling this leg, right, I have a few skills around simplifying the limbs. So like if her leg, let's say her knee was over here and her leg was coming towards us, I'd be pretty good now at like turning the thigh into a cylindrical shape that's coming towards us like this, right? Something like that. Maybe not like that. I'm saying I'm good at it and I'm just doing it terribly. But I really use that when the limb is foreshortened. When it's really flat to my eyes like this, I'm pretty much just going to use like a 2D shape because it's just so much easier. I just see it as an abstract 2D shape and I draw that. Now, one thing I want to make sure I don't do is accidentally, our brains love symmetry. I don't want to have symmetrical curves, right? I want to find the asymmetry and I want to find the sort of tapering, how it tapers towards the knee. So that's the kind of shape that I'm going to go for. These are little things, what kind of lines I want to use, gestural lines and things. These are little things that I've picked up by doing studies of different artists that I like and noticing what kind of lines they use. So even when I'm looking at this thigh, there's so many ways that I could draw it. I could draw it like this, and I know that's not going to work. Or I could kind of draw it like this, right? And there's lots of different ways to do it. I could exaggerate the tapering and make it more narrow at the knee. There's so many different things I could do. I study lots of different artists and I take what I like and I leave what I don't like. Through all those studies, sometimes consciously and sometimes without thinking about it, I'm picking up these little ideas. And so each of these ideas is something that's taken time to learn, all right? All right. Now, one thing that I'm going to do now, so we're like 4 or 5 minutes in, I'm adding a little bit of, see, I'm kind of just messing about with it at this point, right? The main drawing is done and I'm kind of messing about with it. So as I've gone, I have established like this shadow shape, right? And I decided to add some tone, some slightly darker value over here in my drawing. Why? Because that will bring out the light. Because if this area, this shape now is the shape of the light, and then this is the shape of the dark. And if I add some dark back here, it means that the light is set against dark, and so it feels more light, right? Light only feels light when it's set against some dark. And so the other thing that I've done is started to think about where's the focal point of this sketch, where's the bit that I'm most interested in, and it is this area right here, this shape of light. That's the bit that I'm most interested in as I do the sketch. And so I start trying to adjust the edges. And so like when it comes to the shapes of light and dark on the leg, I've made them all a bit more soft, maybe a little bit more vague, so that the real strength goes into the edge between the light and the dark right here. So you can see on the sketch, I've got like stronger marks for this edge of this shadow, because that's where I want to bring the attention. So it took a while before I was confident enough to just be able to sketch this so it didn't look like an alien and the proportions were kind of reasonable, before I could start to think about things like gesture, like the squash and stretch. Then it took a while of working on squash and stretch before I could start to think about how to do the shapes and make sure that the shapes were nicely simplified and not overcomplicated. And I wasn't like focusing on irrelevant little things like this and stuff like that. And as I kept going, eventually I could start to think about the edges. Where do I want to break the edges? Where do I want to emphasize the edges? Where do I want to bring more attention? And where do I want to bring less attention? So it's a long process to learn each of these steps. Then I started getting into, you see here in the digital, because it's digital, I could move stuff around. Like I can get the liquify tool, for example. Wait, let me pull this up. I could get the liquify tool, for example, and I can move things around. So with that tool, I'm able to fix the problem I had where I'd straightened the pose out. So you can see I've pushed the rib cage across a little bit more, so that's great. I also decided to, there's two sketches here. So I've explained one sketch, but it's kind of similar for both of them. So this one, the second one here, one component that I haven't talked about as much is the study of anatomy. So as I've gone along, I've weaved in the study of anatomy along the way, and that basically just helps me make sense of what's going on in this back. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to figure out what I was looking at, right? So if I bring up the reference, not that one, this one, before, this was just a total mess of information that I couldn't make any sense of. And so I would draw like just random bumps on the back. But as I learned about the back and I started to be able to see like things like, oh, there's teres major and this is actually the deltoid coming across and things like that, I'm able then to be more confident just as I navigate the back. So as I've gone along learning all of those other skills, I've been able to learn different bits of anatomy. Now, one struggle is that I would learn really like more detailed and advanced anatomy when I didn't need it. And I just try and memorize all these muscles and stuff that I wasn't ready for. I'd be ready for them now, but at the time they were just adding confusion, right? So it's really important to focus on the right bits of anatomy for where you are. It's something we do in our study group is make sure that you only get what's actually relevant depending on what stage of learning you're at. But you can see in this sketch that I focused on the squash, the stretch. It's all built on the rib cage first, and then the pelvis, and then the angle of the head. So it ends up being this big kind of zigzag shape. Then I'm adjusting, edges, so the edges are more reduced down here, the emphasis is brought up here, and all of those skills that I mentioned for the other sketch. When it comes to adding the color, this is a process that took me a while too. I mean, this is a very quick, just painting onto the pencil sketch, and I'll make a video about how to do that if you're interested. But learning about color is a whole process again that I went through. Now, let's say each of those skills took a month or two to learn. Some of them took like 6 months really. So 6 months spread across, a few years of studying all kinds of things. Some of them would just take like a month or two. So like sharpening the pencil, it took like a month or two. Learning to use the overhand grip, I got used to it after like maybe 6 weeks. The proportions thing though, that took like, I don't know. It took years of measured drawings before I could really just forget about proportions. Simplifying the shapes and designing the shapes is an ongoing process and something that I'm still working on. But that took, that's been just an ongoing thing that I'm working on all the time, is the abstract shapes. The ability to see the ribcage, head and pelvis took me ages. But I think with the resources that we make at Love Life Drawing now, it won't take you that long, and that will really accelerate your progress. So you can see how you may see like different artists and what they do and just think, oh my God, they're just magicians and I will never be able to do that or whatever. But can you imagine if you went through these painstaking processes, these different months working on different things, that you could piece by piece build, like this kind of pyramid of skills, right? Block by block, slowly but surely. And after a few years, you could be doing stuff that you didn't imagine could be possible, right? So it's not about that kind of innate ability. It's really about building the blocks bit by bit. That is actually, by the way that we have designed our study group. So every month we focus on a different skill together, and we're just building those blocks bit by bit, making it doable at every stage. Bite-sized, doable chunks, not some irrelevant other skill that isn't the next step in the road. It's not the next part of the sequence. The next part of the sequence, make it bite-sized and work on that for a month. You don't have to be producing incredible artwork right now, but you're just taking steps, adding building blocks, and you will get there eventually. If you want to check out that Fresh Eyes mini course, it's free, so check out the link below, or you can check out the video on the screen and also consider joining our study group.